Please, and we're on. Well, on behalf of the World Affairs Council, I want to welcome you to our program this evening. I think it's going to be a lot of fun and interesting. I want to thank Thompson Knight for hosting what was the 4 o'clock forum, but now it's the 5 o'clock forum. We think that's a better hour for people. So thanks to Thompson Knight, Michelle, and all our other friends from Thompson Knight here for making this possible. I also want to give a big thanks to Mario Rubio of Aeromexico. Mario, you're here. Mario made it possible to, thank you, Mario, for us to bring in Dr. Alexandri from Mexico City. So he flew in hot on a flight this morning. He's got lots of fresh news for us from Mexico City. So thank you, Aeromexico, for being our new friend for this program and for their support. And I also want to say, just on a personal note, I deal with such unhappy news a lot of the time. My friend Mary Reed knows that. Lots of bad things happening around the world. I think today we're going to hear some good news about something in a part of the world that everyone I know who's been to either Mexico or Brazil loves the food, loves the people, and there is possibly some challenges, but I think we're going to hear some good news, so I know I'm going to enjoy that. Our moderator for the program is Gabriel Ruiz from the Thompson Knight office in Mexico City. So thank you for moderating the program, and I turn this over to you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I understand this is the third or fourth time we do this event with the World Affairs Council, and it's certainly an honor to have you all here. The program today is basically discussing Brazil and Mexico. What can we do to have more competitive economies? What's going on in the political and the legal context of both countries, and what can be done in both countries to have more competitive economies going forward. Myself, let me brief introduction. I'm a partner with Thompson Knight. I'm actually in Monterrey, Mexico. I do a lot of traveling to Mexico City, but I'm based in Monterrey and focus a lot of my practice in representing companies in the energy sector, before Pemex, before CFE, and I am deeply involved in all of what's going on right now in the energy industry in Mexico. Brazil, Mexico, a lot of similarities, a lot of positive aspects of both countries, a lot of energy resources, a growing middle class in each country, easy access to the markets in the US. There's a lot of positives going on in both countries, but what is going on with the rankings of both countries before the World Bank doing business report? Mexico is ranked 48, Brazil is ranked 130. So clearly there's work to be done. There are actions that need to be taken. There are political decisions that need to be taken in order for both countries to go forward. There are a list of proposed reforms in both countries. Mexico is going through a reform process right now. There is education reform that has been passed just last week. Yesterday, in fact, the fiscal reform was presented by President Peña Nieto, and the energy reform is about to go under discussion in the Mexican Congress. So there is a clear intent to move the country in more important ways than before, and we're here to discuss if those actions will have an impact both in Mexico and Brazil. To my right, let me introduce you, Diane Negroponte, non-resident senior fellow with the Latin American Initiative under the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings. A lot of work devoted to research and writing on Latin America, with an emphasis on security issues in Mexico and Central America. Previously, a senior scholar at the U.S. Institute of Peace. She also practiced law with Paul Hastings, Janowski, and Walker, specializing in international trade and aviation matters. Actively played a role in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in Mexico during the negotiations for the North American Free Trade Agreement. Thank you, Dr. Negroponte, for being here. And on my left, Dr. Rafael Alexandri Rionda, former General Director of the Mexican Geological Survey. Previously served on different administrations in the Mexican government under President Cedillo, President Fox, President Calderon. Served as Director General of Exploration and Exploitation of Hydrocarbons at the Ministry of Energy. And he has a recognized prestige in the mining industry as a consultant, advisor, and representative of a number of companies, including Minera Tech, MMM Explorations, Metallica Resources, and Ispat Mexicana, among others. So with that brief introduction, let me pose the question to Dr. Negroponte. What are the factors that you consider that are influencing competitiveness both in Mexico and Brazil? Can you give us an overview of which are those factors and how are each country tackling them?
Gabriel, thank you very much, and my thanks to Camp Thompson Knight and to the World Affairs Council for inviting me down here today. You're telling me you can't hear me?
Yes, it's turned on.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
That's 20.
I knew technology was going to get the better of me. But thank you to Thompson Knight. Thank you to the World Affairs Council for inviting me to join you this evening. And I have to add to Gabriel's introduction that I'm the editor of a book back there, which is a comprehensive look at Mexico today and how Mexico struggling is moving from an age of romanticism, an age where the past and its history was so important, to the contemporary world where the challenges of global competition really press against the traditions of Mexico and are obliging it to change. And some of those changes are very hard. But Gabrielle, let me take up what you have asked me to begin this evening's discussion on. In the last 3 weeks, thousands of teachers took to the streets of Mexico City and other cities. They've blocked the road to the airport, not for a long time, but 6-7 hours on 2 occasions. They're camped out in the central square, a Zócalo, known as a location for protest and expression of one's own political opinions. They've also encircled the National Assembly and forced the president to delay by 1 day his annual report to the country, which is a very important event in the political life of Mexico, and required that he hold it within the confines and secure space of the presidential palace, as opposed to the auditorium, which is the customary place, or the Congress, another public place, which would normally be the venue for such an important event. So protests from teachers in Mexico, and protests too from the energy workers, although that protest, I would claim, has been far more moderate. And what we don't know is whether the education, the teachers, and then the energy workers join together to create more noise or create more confusion in the streets of Mexico City. Balance that, go down now to Brazil, and some of you will remember in June, during the qualifying games for the World Cup, thousands of young men and women and older people taking to the streets and protesting the cost of the bus fares, the increase in the tickets, protesting lousy hospitals, protesting inadequate education. Now, the ticket of the bus fare has been resolved, but the other 2 issues remain vocal, and we add to that a Brazilian senator who was 2 weeks ago convicted of fraud and money laundering, but he will remain a senator. Only the British, who remember certain 19th century politicians who were likewise convicted and served their constituents from within the jail. This one doesn't have to go within the jail, which is why the Brazilians are protesting the political system. So we have these two major countries. Brazil, the 6th largest country in the world. Mexico, the 14th largest economy. Sorry, I should say 6th largest economy, 14th largest economy for Mexico. With this inner turmoil reflecting middle-class expectations of a better world and the inability in the case of Brazil for the government to keep up with citizens' expectations. So I want to identify 5 issues which are common to both. Briefly mention the distinctions which clearly divide them, but leave that to Dr. Alejandri, who is the best storyteller in Houston. So I'm getting my bid in now, because once he takes over, I'm going to listen. Brazil and Mexico. We know they're emerging markets, but both affected by the reduction in the QE2 from the US Federal Reserve, the reduction which was stimulating our economy, but which was sending flights of money to the emerging economies. That is now ending, and with that, the funds are flowing back to North America. Chinese growth has also slowed down, and that's had a major impact on the Brazilian economy, as the Chinese demand for raw materials has slowed relatively. So both these emerging economies are feeling the effects of these two changes, exogenous changes, which they cannot control. But Mexico has announced that its growth has fallen to 1.8%, and that's below that key 2% level, which is necessary for the young men and women who are coming into the labor market each year. 1.3 million young men and women who are looking for work. So any slowdown does impact on their ability for work, certainly in the formal sector. There's a second point which both share. In both countries, the quality of education is not up to the standards which will enable those young men and women to compete in the knowledge economy. There is a standard created by the OECD known as the PISA scores. And Mexico's scores on science, writing, and math, and reading are at the bottom. Yet, all of us in this room know brilliant Mexicans, and of course including Gabriel Ruiz right here with us, who are at the top of their professions with degrees of high stature from major global universities. So while Gabriel is at the summit, or an elite of his generation, many of his contemporaries are still struggling with an average of only 8 years of education. And I'm talking about education of only half a day's work. The result is that the largest number of migrants from Mexico coming to the United States are fulfilling tasks which require very little skill. And the desire of the Mexican government, and I hope the Mexican people, is that they can raise these standards of education, that quality can be introduced so that generations will not come here to cut grass and clean dishes, but will come, like Gabriel, to be a partner in Thompson Knight, to have his law degrees, and to be able to really influence the future of his and our country. Education, too, is a problem in Brazil. Inadequate quality. And schools which invariably are closed. And we can go back into the causes of this, but that was a reason why President Peña Nieto introduced early in his administration a change to the Mexican Constitution regarding education. And he changed the Constitution with just one word. He got an agreement to insert the word quality. Every citizen is entitled by right to quality education. And from there flows the changes which must occur to teachers and to the institutions. Third, similarity between both. There is an emerging middle class. People who now have a car, can afford one vacation away from home, and maybe are becoming home owners as opposed to renters. The consequence of this is that we're slowly seeing a more independent political electorate, who no longer are dependent upon the party for a job, but can afford now to be more selective and to advance their own interests, particularly those of the economy, which is so important. Likewise in Brazil. A strengthening middle class with these expectations, and added to that is the cell phone that we were all asked to turn off. Cell phone and higher expectations have great opportunity, but when those expectations are frustrated, we're seeing men and women take to the streets. In both cases, it would seem to me that the governments are scrambling behind citizens' expectations. Governments can't quite keep pace with the citizens' demand for improvements in social services and public services. And particularly in Brazil, we're seeing the president, Dilma Rousseff, a remarkable woman, wanting to make the improvements that the protesters are asking for. After all, they are thousands throughout the country. But finding that the institutions are so rigid that while she will call for a greater increase in the education budget, it is the governors and it is the state legislatures and it is the bureaucracy which takes time to agree with her policy, or may even contradict it. So a rigid institutional system in Brazil, which is making it very hard to move that country in line with the citizens' needs. And then, finally, both countries have had to accept that the United States government has been listening in to the conversations of their leaders. The NSA was listening to the conversations of Dilma Rousseff, President Rousseff, as she had her discussions on cabinet members and policy, and was listening into the discussions that President Peña Nieto, as a candidate for office, discussed with his political team. In the case of Brazil, this has produced a furore. Dilma Rousseff is due to have a summit meeting with President Obama on October 23, and that is now in doubt. In the case of the Mexican president, he has agreed to investigate into it, and I assume will try to minimize the damage because of the close economic ties that exist between the two countries. But in both cases, there is anger and irritation. That completes my similarities, and I really want to pave the way for Dr. Alejandri and his wonderful stories. So all I would just quickly, just as highlights, the differences. In trade policy, Mexico is open. More than 40 free trade agreements, free market, capitalism is alive and well. In the case of Brazil, it is a protectionist policy. There is a reluctance to open up. In taxes, Brazilians are among the highest taxpayers, and Mexico with only 10% of government expenditures provided by taxes, it's among the lowest. Energy, Petrobras, production sharing, opening to the international oil companies, and Mexico tentatively moving towards profit sharing contracts, and we have our experts on the left. And finally, Mexico has become an industrial and manufacturing country, and Brazil fundamentally remains an agricultural country. So two important powers within this hemisphere, not necessarily best friends, but for the United States, both are very important, and relations with them are cultivated and we hope will improve. Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you, Diana. You mentioned the energy industry in Mexico, and with that in mind, I want to turn it over to Dr. Alexandri, and I want to ask him about his take on the Mexican energy industry. What changes are being proposed, and what do you think will be the future for Mexico's energy industry, and the impact that those changes may have in Mexico's economy and competitiveness?
First of all, thanks to Thompson Knight for hosting this meeting. I'm really honored to be here, and also to the World Affairs Council for this invitation. Diana, a pleasure to see you again after so many years. And Gabriel, it's really a great honor to share with you this audience. Well, I'm going to set first the perspective of this, and to understand really well what Diana really in a wonderful form told us. First of all, I believe most of you have been in Mexico for some or two or three reasons, or many reasons, or vacation, or whatever you want to do. And probably you have realized that most of us, we think Mexico is a rich country. I like to think that, but it's not true. 45 million people in Mexico are under poverty under United Nations classification. And I think we're trying to push it to the 45. 5 years ago, we were 53. We did something with a few Mexicans. Probably we sent them to the States. And here we have a big debate if we have 22 million or 30 million. I don't know, but we have many million. And there is a reason for it. So, total population of Mexico is 112, 115 million. Half of the population of Mexico is under poverty, clearly poverty. So this statement that Diana was setting really well, and I love your phrase, this romanticism of Mexico that we have to leave on the side and move into the global competition is more than true. We have to live a contemporary history, not a past history. 70 years of PRI created this beautiful romanticism of history and wars and heroes that didn't create any value to the country. But the worst part of it is 13 million people of Mexico are under extreme poverty. Extreme poverty means 13 million people that didn't have one decent meal during the day. One meal during the day. 13 million. So those of you that thought that Mexico was a great country, already becoming this middle class, trying to push up, look guys, we have a big, huge problem. Half of the population are poor, and 13 million, 10%, 10% of the total population of Mexico under extreme poverty. How come the Mexican economy, the government could move this into the expectations for the future if we don't do a major change in the political paradigm. Well, if we just add a little new factor to this Mexican vision that is called security, that creates a huge cost to the companies today to survive. Where the ability of government to create the environment to grow is all the time growing more and more and more. And you can find that in the news. These groups of self-defense, especially in the south part of Mexico, what you see in the television is 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 people armed with really poor shotguns, etc. Well, that's television. The true thing is that in these towns, there are not 10, are hundreds of people taking the safety of their families, the security of their towns in their hands. And are not 10, are hundreds of them. Because the inability of the government to provide them with security. On the other hand, Peña Nieto's government has been really wonderful, excellent job on operating the press. As soon as Calderon left office, all this problem, all this killing that you were seeing on television, in the news, was stopped. All of the sudden, from the day to the night. Reality is not. Reality is we still have more than 1,000 killings related to the gangs, to the narco gangs happening in Mexico. So what happened? It's operating the press. The press is under a waiver to the president, so he can move into what we are creating, thinking that would take us to the next step to move into a much better country. And in order to get that, we have to reform many things. Many, many, many things. And not everything is bad. Labor reform was established, voted in Congress, and is operational today. And no major disruption in the country because of the labor reform. Unions took it, our industry look at it, and it's operating today. The education reform, Diana presented it really well. We have thousands of teachers now moving around Mexico City and other cities, creating jobs to millions of Mexicans. Last night, President presented the fiscal reform, something that prior presidents tried to do and were not able to pass it into Congress. Well, it seemed that yesterday we got all the actors together and they were able to agree that they can pass this reform. It's very important. And the order is fundamental. Labor, educational, fiscal. And why fiscal was so important? Because if you don't have the fiscal reform, you won't have Pemex reform. Because Pemex requires a new system to operate, a new way to do things. So we have now the energy reform that was already, the PAN party presented its position, PRD presented their position with Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas in front, and the president presented. Many people ask me, would the energy reform go through? Yes, no doubt. Some changes here, some changes there, but it will go through. Absolutely. It's fundamental. And not fundamental because we want still to get a lot of money from it. No, it's fundamental not to put more money into Pemex. And then it will come the political reform. We have to change the way we are structured politically to have a much better democracy operating. I will get back to the energy reform shortly. Now, we have problems, big, huge problems still to solve. One is corruption. And I heard many numbers here and there how much corruption costs to Mexico. Well, I keep saying, I know the top industries that are far ahead of any other in the world. Oil and coal, both energy. And I would say, in order to have a corrupt bureaucrat, because in Mexico, Pemex is a monopoly of the government, you need somebody to corrupt. So we have to fight both sides, not just one side, both sides. But this, I don't know how much overcost corruption is in the energy industry, but it's high. It's very high, and I spent 15 years working in it, and I still cannot value it. Probably corruption is as high in the energy sector as security for the companies today. Now, the other matter is the ability of government to execute these reforms. The ability of government to make this hydrocarbon general direction to control the new way we want Pemex to operate. The equivalent to the AMP in Brazil, the ability to create a petroleum directorate like in Norway. First of all, we have to make sure that in this hydrocarbon direction, we have people that are not corrupt to start with. That easy, that simple. Do we have those Mexicans? Big question. And then the political factor. We should congratulate President Peña Nieto for putting all the participants in this political game in consonance. They are writing, it's like a huge orchestra. The director wrote the partiture to them. They need a very good director. He's a great director. I don't know how good he will be to execute, but he's a good writer. Now, in the energy reform, the key factor is the contract that they are proposing. The sharing of profits. Nothing new. It won't be different than the one that is established in Brazil, in Colombia. It's a common contract. So for those of you who are thinking, what is going to be the contract in Mexico? Exactly the same than anywhere in the world. And I haven't seen the contract. Nobody has seen the contract. But the key factor was written yesterday when the president said Pemex will have a fiscal reform that will show exactly the same position that the private companies will have in their energy reform. Pemex today, in the new fiscal reform, will have 10% tax as a royalty, will be taxed as a corporate, and they will have a contract. And Pemex can take that contract now or within 4 years. it will be exactly the same treatment for Pemex than for the companies. A profit-sharing contract. I think that's the most wonderful news I have heard since I have memory, 60 years. I'm not that. Anyway, but those were great news for me. Pemex finally will become a company, a corporation. And they will be subject to the same contractual basis than the companies that will participate in taxing. I heard this, I don't know, 15 years ago when I went first time to Norway with the Statoil. Statoil was going to be treated exactly like any company. Fantastic. We're coming a little bit behind in time. Okay, so a new fiscal regime. The companies have to feel that openness, transparency. How are they going to get taxed? For how long? One of the things that companies hate the most is changes. You change from here to there. Ask Brazil. When I look at the fiscal regime in Brazil, I said, wow, you have more accountants than engineers here. One more question that is very important. What will be a key factor for this contract, for this new contract in Mexico? National content. If we don't have national content, forget it. We don't advance. We need to create technology, advance, create engineers, what you were saying, education, universities, open the industry. I don't have any against the expats. All I'm saying, what we need to have in our house. No. Well, a little detail here and there. What about the union? Companies ask me, do we have to contract the union, the petroleum union? Can we go with our own people? Can we contract companies? Can we? If they don't correct this situation in the new contract, 50% of the reform is gone. You have to have the freedom to contract with whoever is best for your company. Pemex union won't create any competitiveness. Zero. Will create a major slowdown in the reform. I'm positive on that. Timing. Well, here and there, what we have seen in the educational reform is nothing compared to what we will be seeing on the energy reform about people on the streets. We will have thousands of marches, thousands of people. López Obrador will have thousands of people moving here and there, but the reform will go, and I believe, please write that, I'm going to film. December will be voted. Lighter or not. December will be voted positively. And then all we will have is the constitutional reform. Very much the way it is. No concessions and a contract. Changes here and there, probably. We need a petroleum agency strong enough to control the new players. After December, two things have to happen. One is secondary laws. You have to have the secondary laws reformed and change it. Totally, absolutely, totally change. And in those secondary laws will be the rules under which you will be playing if you go to invest in Mexico. And the third point is the contract. How is the contract going to be set? And the contract is not with Pemex. Believe me, it won't be with Pemex. It will be one of the worst things to do. The contract has to be with the Mexican government. The owner of the resource is the nation, and the one who is responsible for the resources is the government. So the government is the one who has to issue the contracts, like in Norway, like in Brazil, like Colombia, anywhere in the world. Okay? And of course, after the contract, the bidding. Those of you that have worked in Mexico on these open bids know how long it takes a bidding in Mexico. So December, constitutional reform, probably 6 more months to have the secondary law and the contract, and 6 more months to have the first bid concluded. How long? From when I have here to 2 years to go. So we have to do something in between. We have to do something. We need money. We need to change things. Something has to happen in between. So more money for Pemex, more contracts, more service contracts, probably much more work for companies to do servicing to the oil industry in Mexico. But in my vision, no earlier than a year and a half to have the first contract bidded in Mexico. That put us right next to the midterm elections in the country. So we better hurry up.
Thank you, Dr. Alexandri.
You told me we had all that.
You mentioned a lot of things are happening in Mexico, a lot of changes, and I want to ask Diana, what do you know Brazil is doing similar to Mexico to affect its low competitiveness? Is Brazil thinking about structural reforms as is Mexico? What is your take on what Brazil is doing to attack this term that it's known as Brazil cost, an apparent low competitiveness of the country?
Well, the first reform that President Dilma confronted was corruption. And this was a reform which affected her own political coalition. Because under a traditional system, every member of her coalition received an envelope every month. And in that envelope was the payment or compensation for remaining within the coalition. And so her courage to break up that system, to accuse and then convict the leaders of each of those political parties for their receipt of those monthly envelopes, and then the next stage, which is the harder, to send them to jail. She cannot and has not been able to do the last part of that reform, which has contributed to the protest in the street. Brazilians recognize that they have to undertake the reforms, and in the energy sector they are way ahead of the Mexicans because they did not have this constitutional prohibition which was quasi-sacred. So they managed to make the changes to Petrobras to create a second Petrobras company which had more rights for exploration. So in the energy sector, Brazil has modernized. The experts may tell me that it should modernize even further, but it has succeeded in bringing the technology, in bringing in the management capacity to do some very sophisticated and difficult exploration in the pre-salt area. Dr. Alexandri will tell us pre-salt is 1 or 2 kilometers below the seabed. Many, huh? Many kilometers below the seabed. So energy, Brazil is ahead. in regulation, in government procedures, they are still in the last century. A long way to go.
And Dr. Alexandri, you mentioned that the key to Mexico's energy reform are going to be the model contract, the profit sharing contract that has been announced by the Mexican government. How do you see that model contract addressing the issues such as booking reserves? That is an issue that is often raised by clients and friends here in Houston. How do you see that issue being addressed in the new legislation?
Okay, well, I don't know, kind of 10 years ago, Mr. Longwell from ExxonMobil came to me and told me, Rafael, we're very patient. We can be waiting for you 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, whatever it takes, we will be here. Well, he was a prophet. But he asked me, the first thing he said, you know that we won't go to Mexico if we don't have a way to book reserves. So I went to the SEC in New York and asked them how fundamental was to have the reserves being booked for the large companies like Exxon, Shell, Chevron. And they told me, well, actually, we don't care about the reserves, and we don't care about the barrel. We would care about the level of security the companies have, how strong the contract is. If you have a 30-year or a 50-year contract that you can honor, and you have it, and the reserves are being operated by you, handled by you, you monetize those reserves, and what we care is the monetization of the reserves, not the barrel itself. So now that I'm in another sector, in the mining sector, I went to Toronto and I asked them again the same question: how necessary is to book the barrel? And they gave me the same answer. What we want to see in the financials is the value of the contract. If you can transform that contract into value, it's what we want to see. So, and I would say for Mexico that we're just followers. We're not heading the lead of this. We're followers of what some other countries are doing, like Brazil in their contracts, like Norway in their contracts, like Colombia in their contracts. So I would say it would be exactly the same situation. If you cannot book the reserve itself because it's a contract, what you will put in your financial statements is that you have a contract. What lawyers have to be very careful is that that contract can be monetized, transformed into a value for the company. And then it can be added to financial statements. I would say, and I would like to learn more, if somebody here could clarify that better, because I think it's a major factor for the investors. That's my experience so far. And in mining, nobody cares. They have the right for the mineral, they extract it, sell it, monetize it, that's it. So I would say it's similar to that. It's a renewable natural resource.
Okay. Diana, hearing Dr. Alexandri, we want to turn to Brazil and hear how, what's your opinion about the correlation between educational levels and worker productivity? How Brazil and Mexico are tackling the educational issues and technical training? I know that you mentioned it in your opening statement, but how is that issue important in both economies going forward?
They're critical. If we don't have the scientists, and we don't have the technologists and the engineer, you get stuck in the past. Question is how, on an accelerated basis, do you bring this generation into the contemporary world? Well, the President of Mexico has engaged on a very determined effort for training of young men and women, young scientists and engineers, Brazilians, in the United States. She will do it with government funds. At the moment, there are 4,000 young Brazilian students in the United States, and her intent is that this will increase to 30,000 within the next year. Now that requires that the Brazilian government invest those monies, plus that those young men and women learn English. Because regretfully, there are very few of us talking Portuguese here in the United States. So we've got a language problem. But there is this clear recognition that until the current generation is as familiar with engineering and mathematical terms, they're not going to advance. There's a great focus.
So, Linda, I don't know how we're on time, but is it?
A few questions from the audience.
Yes, that was what I was going to suggest. If we can open it up to the audience, I don't know if you have any questions. Please just introduce yourself briefly and state your question.
And has anybody got a pencil so that I can write down the question and the name, because I've left mine by my cup of tea.
Here you go, Diane.
Would you need it?
I don't know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. First of all, I'm Pablo Medina from Wood Mackenzie, and my question was for Dr. Alexandri. It was, given the government's target of reaching 3 million barrels per day by 2018, the only way that I could see that happening, it will not come from unconventionals, being shale. It will not come from deep water. So the only thing that I could see is from around zero, where Pemex would be able to farm out stakes of existing fields where private companies could come and invest and put EOR in those fields. And that could have a huge impact right there, considering Chicontepec. That could be another possibility, but what do you think would be a good option for that to happen?
Well, it's a very good question, because everything comes down to timing, exactly to that. We knew Cantarell was going to decline, and history shows it. Cantarell is gone. We knew it, except that politicians never understood technicians. Oil is not a renewable resource. But Chicontepec will be a very difficult field. We know it. We have been trying really hard to make it productive. And the proposal we made about 10 years ago or 15 years ago was to change the model to more a Canadian model. Rather than have one operator that is huge, like Pemex, have 2,000 companies, small companies, like here in Texas, many companies operating blocks. But the politicians said, no, not a chance, too difficult. So Chicontepec is not the solution. Reserves in Chicontepec, to give an idea, are almost the same than in Cantarell. When I used to come to Houston to talk here, I used to say, Cantarell is a well, Chicontepec is a bunch of tunas. Those two said it. To get a bunch of tunas, you need a bunch of fishermen. And I think that's a good way. The other option that won't be high productivity is the oil fields. But still a big problem to extract. And the other option is to go to the ocean. And rather than multiply by almost 30 the capacity to drill. But I don't see how we can get 1 million more barrels than what we're getting today unless you open it to the new players. There is no way.
Alexandria, my name is Tom Sacom. My associate and I, Floyd Abasi, we own Global Speak Oil and Gas Translation Services. And speaking with technical oil and gas processes, we do quite a bit of work for companies in Mexico and also in Brazil, translating their documents for exploration programs. My question to you will be this: in a perfect world, say the contract becomes valid today.
Okay.
Now the market is open. what do you see as far as the influx of, say, operating opportunities that companies here in the United States could have in Mexico?
Well, taking the prior question, the goal is set already. The government set a goal of 1 to 1.5 million more barrels here per day. In order to achieve it, you have to open very rapidly, and not just one area. You have to open in multiple areas, and you have to be capable to have road shows all over, especially in the U.S. and Canada, promoting these blocks for companies to be interested to come to Mexico and bid for each block. If you don't do that, you won't achieve the 1.5 million barrels. We don't have another Cantarell. The deep water will take too long. The oil fields don't have that productivity. So you need lots of help, lots of help. So I would say the opportunity is there, but you have to execute it very rapidly. And the key factor, I shared that, I cannot agree more with Diane, is training. You have to get the 3 levels. The young engineers, the ones that are coming into schools, they take 4 or 5 years to get out. Then you have to get the young people that are already working. You have to rapidly train them, and the top people to be managers and know what a company is. Remember, Pemex doesn't know what a company is. They have a monopoly, even when they want to think they are a company. Same thing happened in Petrobras. I lived that with Petrobras. They thought they were a company. No, they were a monopoly. And I remember going to Chevron and talking to Chevron and said, how do you see this mechanism? They keep telling me it's very difficult to work with Petrobras. They don't understand productivity. They don't competitiveness. And that's one thing that also will come with this reform. We don't know how to measure Pemex. If Pemex comes to us and told us a well costs 40 million, we say thank you. But we don't know, we don't have any way to compare, to compete. So I think the answer is there. If we really want to change it, we have to go all the way. And remember, Pemex has been managed by politicians. We politicians are terrible managers. We need managers to operate companies. So many things to change, many things to change.
Hi, I'm Sam Cho. I am representing Korean American. I'm here, this side. To your right. So I'm representing Korean American Energy EMP Society. We have about 400 members here working in the Houston area, and mostly the U.S. oil and gas company and service company as well. Now, understand that the Mexico is going to reform, and wonderful thing happened. All foreign companies, including U.S., went to the Mexico and developed the oil and gas properties by using inner recovery or upgraded technology. Suppose we have done a wonderful job in Mexico. Mexico as economics has been well and developed. But we have to look at the historical background of Mexico. So the nightmare what I see is nationalizations. It's very common to developing country and Middle East and every other areas. So how confident are you? My question is, how confident are you Mexico going to say, hey, we are going to nationalize once Mexico has economically developed?
Well, let me put it this way. When President Chavez took over, well, he didn't take over. He won the election in Venezuela. Nobody really realized what he was going to do. Out of what has happened in Venezuela, only one block was taken from the companies. It was a block that ExxonMobil returned to the Venezuelan government. Besides that, nothing has happened. All the facilities are there, all the operations are there, nothing happened really. And that's the most radical position I have seen in Latin America. Repsol in Argentina, Repsol didn't fulfill the compromises of investment in Argentina for the gas. So the president decided that they were not doing a good job. We also have to think that there are two players, two entities here. One is the country and another one are the companies. Sometimes, all the time, what we hear or what we would like to see is that the companies behave really well. Is that real? Or they are the ones who create the problem and they just suffer the consequences. That's the case of the Mexican nationalization. And we didn't nationalize the petroleum. The petroleum already belonged to the nation, even during the nationalization of 1938. That's why we had to pay for the industry. And we had to pay to every company that was operating in Mexico. And under today's conditions in the world, I don't see those conditions being repeated again. I think we're more open. And Mexico, as Diane was saying, we are an economy that are leaders in an open economy. So I don't see that in Mexico. We're not thinking even considering that factor of nationalization. Something has to happen with the companies for us to look back. The cost for the country, any country, not just Mexico, is too expensive. Too expensive.
Diana, your take on nationalizations in Latin America?
No, I would agree with Dr. Alexandri. I do not think that we're living in an age of nationalization. We had the Repsol, but that was only part of Repsol, and I would not expect that to occur in Mexico.
Hi. Hi, my name is Pedro Costa, also with Wood Mackenzie. I would like to quick add to the Brazil program. I'm one of these students here in US, and not just engineering or technical areas, Brazil also lack of senior and high-level management positions, so it's important to keep that in mind. My question though is about the Mexican reform, and for several years we know that Pemex has been a cash cow to the government revenues. How do you see this dynamic changing the short term and the long term for the government? Is this like will be a hard challenge for the government to overcome?
Yeah, I think it was very clear said yesterday by the president. The fiscal reform is the key factor. Company will be taxed exactly like any company in Mexico. Not anymore a cash cost for the government. We know 30% of the revenue of the government comes from Pemex, but if we have more players, we can get that money covered. And it will be a deficit of 1.8% of the GDP, and it will be necessarily, Mexico has to borrow money to cover it. See, remember, growth of Mexico dropped from 3.4 to 1.75 this year. So we have to cover that up. But the way the government thinks today is that Pemex is not anymore a monopoly. We'll have to share with others, and it's where the money will come. I'm
going to turn the mic over. I had a quick question for Diane. Well, two quick. First of all, I've enjoyed your book very much. So are you going to be able to linger a little bit and sign copies for us afterwards? And then second, you do talk a little bit about breaking up other monopolistic industries, telecommunications and cement, I understand, costs 3 times as much in Mexico. What else is being done in Mexico to break up other industries?
Well, there is antitrust legislation to break up the great monopolies which exist and which have really dominated the industry in Mexico. But whether, in fact, when the secondary legislation goes through and the implementation is passed, whether these great monopolies will actually be broken up is doubtful, because they exercise such influence and help the president so much. The president has a problem. He needs to look after some foreign guests. He will ask the owners of those major companies, please provide the hospitality, please provide the aeroplanes, please feed and house them. And there is an agreement. The leaders of those industries will oblige. And the president can appear as a wonderful, generous head of state at the cost of someone else. So I will doubt that, in fact, those companies will be broken up.
There is a saying that is, we have to, in mathematics you go for multiple approaches.
I'm Dee Ulrich, and I have 2 questions about education. One is, when these young people from Brazil are educated, how does Brazil ensure they come back home instead of being snapped up by companies in the U.S.? And my other question is, in Mexico, what are the odds that the education reforms are going to succeed?
Well, I think we should be asking Pedro Cosa whether Pedro plans to go back to Brazil, which I hope that he will. The young men and women that I have met remain deeply committed to their country and to their families. So long as there are good jobs for them at home, they will want to go back. So I remain hopeful, but I think, Pedro, we're going to put you on the spot. Are you going home?
Yes, I am. But the thing is that this is a big question there for this. It's called Brazil Science Without Borders program. They are sending thousands of students, not just to US, but other countries as well. And we have to come study and work for a part-time job, like academic training, and then we are obligated to go back and stay in Brazil for twice as the amount of the time we stayed in the US. So maybe I'll come back to US, maybe some students will come back to US eventually, but after the program, we have to go back and stay in Brazil. So the knowledge goes back and stay in the country.
Thank you. I can see there are a couple other questions, but I'm going to ask that since we're running a little bit over, if you could just stick around and ask the speakers your additional questions during the cocktail hour, which will begin in just a moment here, but we'll have food and drink, so please stay.
We're missing one question.
Well, we're probably missing more than one, but I'm just trying to be mindful of everyone's time. But is there?
No, she asked 2 questions.
Oh, you need to answer it. I thought you were saying.
Okay, the biggest problem in Mexico comes from teachers that are from the south, the poorest and also more difficult part of the country. And these teachers created this group opposing to the traditional syndicate. But probably they represent less than 10% of the total teacher population in Mexico. I'm saying 10% to give you a number. I don't really have the clear number. So I would say the reform will succeed because the majority, especially in the north central Mexico, are agreeing on that. Or they are convinced, or they were some way convinced by their own unions. So it will succeed. But what cost will be the southern groups probably will take longer, much longer. And that's a shame because it's the poorest part. So the kids are the ones who will suffer this change. No doubt.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Dr. Alexandri. And hopefully everyone can stay a little bit for cocktails. And thank you for being here.